From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Digital Banter podcast. Of course, you have myself, Andy Groller, and as always, my co-host, James Kravik.
Welcome back, everybody. My wife says I need to be more deliberate with my intros, so I'm very excited to be here today. And I got some cool buttons to play with, so this podcast is going to be phenomenal moving forward.
That's right. It's filmed before a live studio audience today. So last time we spoke, we talked about how to drive more efficiencies out of our marketing budgets, especially paid media, in the year 2023. We talked about AI, we talked about creative, we talked about measurement tech, and today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into targeting tech, specifically B2B targeting tools and how best to utilize them to tap into untapped channels. Now, B2B targeting and ultimately marketing has been difficult and become more difficult over the coming years with changes in third-party data, cookies, buyer shifts in mentality and psychology and behaviors. But James, why don't we talk a little bit more about what we're referring to with B2B targeting tools?
Yeah, for sure. So we spend a lot of time putting together detailed ICPs, persona documentation, outlining the size of the company, the decision maker committee, like all of this work to essentially run search ads on Google and LinkedIn, because we are limited to our ability to target those individuals. Like you said, Facebook has a very limiting targeting that you're able to use when it comes to B2B. When all that stuff happened with the elections and all that a couple of years ago, their targeting just basically turned to crap. For B2B, at least. You know, it's very difficult to hit SaaS CMOs on Facebook. And that goes for pretty much any B2B buying committee for the most part. So what has really emerged since then, these have been around longer than I think I give them credit for. I think it's something that you're seeing a lot of marketers start to use a lot more, but it's tech that essentially is data providers that we can leverage, essentially build out those ICPs and personas, buying committees, exactly how we have them lined in our internal documentation, and use it for targeting. And then, one of the great things about it too is we can also then vet the lists that we're actually targeting. So we put in, hey, we want to target CMOs at a company size of 100 million or more in the SaaS space, right? You can build out that persona and it's going to spit out a list that you can then use for targeting. And historically, you haven't been able to do that. It's been, people in this age range who are in these marketing groups, who follow this subreddit. I mean, every channel is different, but long story short, it's been impossible to do that. And now any platform that has the ability to do a first-party audience upload, an email list, you can target exactly who you want to target.
There's two things that I think are important that we make distinctions of as we set the stage here too. The first one is, to your point, these targeting tools open up the opportunity to tap into other channels and move away from what has become the stale B2B playbook of LinkedIn ads and Google search, and probably retargeting in some capacity as the only other way you get into those other channels, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, etc. So it allows us as marketers to think outside the box, think creatively of how we engage our buyer set in prospecting efforts rather than rely solely on retargeting efforts to run those other channels. The second thing that I think is important that we make a distinction of upfront is what we're talking about is contact level targeting tools, which is very different than an ABM tech stack where, either it's 6 Sense or Terminus or Demand Base, where you are able to create account segments that are based off of behavioral intent signals that in the case of 6 Sense, might be getting captured and looked at across the web, but also the way in which those platforms deliver ads is primarily in banner ads. We're not talking about that. Yes, some of those platforms certainly have those capabilities of this level of detail, but in full transparency, the targeting tools that we're talking about today open up the opportunity well beyond just running banner ads, maybe LinkedIn ads, to a set persona that lives under an account. No, we're talking about the creation of first-party data audiences that enable us to tap into things like CTV, programmatic audio, so Spotify, again, Facebook and Instagram, like we're kind of talking about today. But the other reason here that we need to think about this is cost, right? And when we talk about cost efficiency in our most recent episode, James, you made a good point about LinkedIn ads being extremely expensive. I think that's a good point to bring back up for our listeners today.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is I think it's the most expensive ad platform that's out there right now. I mean, to put it in perspective, CPMs on connected TV, I think, are less expensive than LinkedIn, which is kind of crazy. You typically think of TV as a high media cost format, but I mean, LinkedIn CPMs are $50. I think the price for CTV right now is around $30. So again, there's different things that, levels of competition, what time of year it is. Like, there's all kinds of stuff to worry about. For example, CTV and B2B, I probably would slow that budget Q4 spending because of the holidays and stuff, just because of who you're competing with, where you don't typically see that on LinkedIn. So there's definitely some strategy we had there, but it's significantly less expensive to use third-party targeting tools to get yourself on media channels that are typically less expensive. Facebook, Instagram is typically 1/3 of the cost of what LinkedIn is. Reddit is cheap. Twitter is cheap. I mean, you could probably do Pinterest if you wanted to at this point. I don't know if it makes sense, but again, less expensive ways, and you can now focus more on where your audience actually hangs out, the content that they consume, rather than where you have the ability to target them.
Exactly. And the emergence and proliferation of these B2B targeting tools has ultimately changed the game. So let's dive into how these tools work to a degree. Now, each tool is going to obviously offer a different set of features and ways in which you go about using it, from the creation of first-party data audiences through to data enrichment and other kind of efforts and opportunities as it relates to B2B marketers. But let's just keep it kind of simple here, James. What can somebody that is looking at one of these tools expect to get out of it? And how do they take advantage of those deliverables and outputs for their marketing?
Yep. So let me first say that all of these tools are different, and many of the tools that we're going to talk through today offer additional services and products that are not necessarily relevant to what we are talking about. A lot of them are sales-oriented tools that have a whole suite of sales-related products. So we're talking specifically from the marketing side. And really, there's two core things that I would look for in a tool. There's the ability to create customer or prospect lists based on persona-based data. So like I said, you have your ideal customer profile, your ICP, they have the ability for you to plug in that information and in return get contacts of people. And a lot of sales teams are already using this for cold outreach. It's kind of a similar thing, except for in this way, we're kind of focusing more on the marketing side rather than trying to book meetings right now on a cold call. And then the second piece is data enrichment. And data enrichment can be used for a variety of different reasons. On the targeting side, when you have first-party data, it's typically based off of email addresses, right? Most people, if you have a list of business emails that you got from sales that they're trying to reach out to, that they scraped from websites or wherever it may be, being able to tie that back to personal contact. So, somebody signs up for LinkedIn with their Gmail address, or you sign up with Twitter with their Yahoo address, like all of your spam email accounts that you have where you just don't ever want it checked, right? From ad targeting, though, those are all data points that are tied back to an individual person. So what these tools have, and a lot of the ad platforms have it at this point too, is like essentially identity graphing, where they're taking device IDs, IP addresses, email addresses, a million different data points and tying it back to an individual. So you're able to improve measurement is a huge thing, but you're also able to improve accuracy of being able to reach that person. So if you have a list of business emails and you want to tie it to their personal email, then your match rate on Facebook ads, for example, is going to, instead of, 20%, because you have all business emails, maybe even less than that, you're going to have a 93% match rate. So the amount of people that you can reach on that channel is drastically different. Also, from a marketing perspective, there's a couple tools out there that will allow you to essentially simplify your forms on your website. So you just ask for name and email, and they'll give you the rest of the contact information, phone number, what company they work at, that kind of stuff.
I think the one thing that you bring up there at the beginning is a very important point. How many B2B brands out there, both in general, but those that we know, kind of toss out any lead that comes through that's a Gmail, a Yahoo, a live.com, right? Hotmails, whatever the personal domain may be, that they just automatically exclude. And tools like this allows a brand to reconsider that kind of rule that they have in place within their automation platforms to instead enrich that data and see, if I get 5 Gmails in, well, what are the business emails that are tied to those profiles? And therefore, not only, to your point, James, it increases match rates because of the more data that you're able to provide within the advertising platforms, but it may actually move, leads that were historically unqualified or disqualified because of the email domain coming through to all of a sudden being MQLs, SQLs, and some of the best leads that you may consider for a sales team, right?
Yeah. Think about like top of funnel. As much as the industry is moving away from it, the strategy of content syndication, gated content is still a big thing. And typically when you want to download an ebook, you're going to use the email that nobody wants, right? At least at this point, you can get the right contact information in your nurturing stream that happens after that, right? So by matching that Yahoo address to the business email, you can actually have the business email in your nurturing stream rather than the Yahoo, which goes to your inbox, which has 100,000 unread messages, right? So at least from a marketing standpoint, you're getting those additional touch points that you want, which is helpful.
So that's the other thing you brought up that I think is important to mention here is the fact that this just opens up so many opportunities to move away from third-party targeting that has been up to this point so broad, so basic, but also on the flip side of that, the tools that exist or have existed up to this point and the delays in their information being updated to be current based off of job hopping, changes in position, or just missing people altogether. I can't tell you how many times that we've worked with outbound lead generating services over the years where, they deliver a list of contacts at a given account that I know is missing like the actual decision makers because I can just go to LinkedIn and find them. And these tools help to overcome a lot of that because of refresh rates, which are, correct me if I'm wrong, James, typically like every 30 days, right?
Yeah, some of these tools too even offer to target people who recently changed jobs. So, right. Don't get me wrong, not all of them have it. I think that's kind of a specialty thing that some of these companies are offering. But yeah, that refresh rate is super important.
Yeah, and at the top level, the biggest thing here is the shift away from third-party data and third-party targeting that has become saturated, broad, and to a certain extent, wasting everybody's money and time, to a need to shift towards first-party data, whether it's first-party data you're actively collecting through forms and people visiting your site and things like that, or in this case, in some cases, buying a list. But it's not necessarily buying a true list of emails, right, James? You're getting a little bit more nuance of a deliverable and output with many of these tools, right?
Yeah, usually you get name, email, company. And for ad target, it depends on what it costs more to actually get the actual contact information, where for ad targeting, usually the emails are like a hashed list. But the great thing about it is you can go through and vet the lists when you're done, right? So you create a lookalike audience on Facebook of your existing customers. Like Facebook is matching that to, oh, like our customers are movie lovers. They're interested in sports. They like gambling, like versus, you create a lookalike audience in one of these tools, you're able to see the name, the company that they work for, and then you can go through and vet that entire list, scrub that list. I think that does lead to the point that with any of these tools and with anything, like you need to, quality of the data is going to vary. Some tools are going to be better in some industries. Some are not going to be that good, but you have the ability to verify it, which is the part that is really cool that you don't really get anywhere else.
The other thing, and correct me if I'm wrong here because I might be off, but the other thing that sets these tools apart from any other sales tool you may have out there that, you can basically scrape the web and find contact information is the amount of data points that are provided, especially as it relates to ad platforms. If I'm not mistaken, you're going to get hashed IDs and everything else that are going to enable those match rates to skyrocket, correct?
Yeah. That's a huge part of what these tools are used for, is improving the match rates. It is still heavily email based, and tool by tool, you might get something different. Like I remember we looked at, and we'll get into some of these, but like Primer, for example, could export the data in device IDs, which is something that we use for connected TV. So, you got to use the tools for what they excel at. But the core thing across the board is the match rates are drastically improved.
So let's jump into that then. Let's talk about some of these tools and give a glimpse as to what exists on the market. And, from our perspective, what we've talked about with these brands and kind of did some discovery work on our own behalf with them. Let's talk about, some of the tools that we've come across that are a little bit more geared towards us as agencies. Do you want to talk about those tools?
Yeah, for sure. So there's really two that I would think of right off the bat. Versium is a huge one. Versium is great because as an agency, we have the ability to build targeting segments and export them for any brand that we work with, right? So I think as we get into this, one of the big cons that we saw with some of the other is everything requires a year-long contract, and everything requires it's essentially licensed per brand that you work with, which just really isn't agency friendly because we can't shift things around easily, right? Like I want to build an audience for my one SaaS client and then my one medical hardware client, and kind of use the same tool and bounce back and forth, and only continue to use it if it's working and driving results for a client. Where some of the other tools, they don't have that level of flexibility. The tool also has, it has the persona-based audience builder. It has data enrichment, and there's a lot of other things involved in it too, but those are the two main things that we use it for. The other one that I think is like pretty agency friendly is Zoom Info. The reason I say that is it has definitely the largest database. I think a lot of people talk about the quality of it sometimes being a little bit questionable, but they have acquired a lot of data sets, a lot of companies over the course of the last several years, and definitely have the largest database. And the other thing is sales is probably already using it because they are the tool that is the most established. Andy, I don't know if you remember, but I think our first experience with Zoom Info was like 4 years ago, maybe more.
More than that,
yeah. So it's been around for a while. Where everything else here, I would probably consider like a startup. I think Versium's been around for a bit too, but some of the others are more startup.
So those are some good ones for us looking at it from an agency perspective. And I think the disclaimer I should have actually mentioned before I even gave you the mic to talk about some of these is we're not endorsing any of these tools. This is purely third-party objective feedback and thoughts based off of our own conversations and looking at all of these tools in some capacity. So I think it ultimately is going to come down to your use cases, your budget, and what is most applicable to your use cases and ultimately you as the business. But that disclaimer now being out there, let's talk about those tools, James, that might be a little bit better for in-house marketers?
Yeah. I mean, metadata is a huge one. Metadata offers pretty much everything that we talked about in the other tools, but they also have some other built-in features that are good for in-house marketers. Like actually, metadata as a tool is really a campaign management and optimization tool where you can essentially launch and run tests all within the platform. You know, it kind of integrates with Google and LinkedIn, and it's kind of an all-in-one system. But they do offer a separate tool called Meta Match, which is their audience building tool. I mean, they have great. I think the thing I really liked about them is that they continuously refresh based on the best data sources. So, you know, and kind of one of the things I've heard is that they do have some of the best quality of data. You know, they might not have the largest database that's out there, but they do focus on quality. So they're really good. Clearbit is probably one of the coolest tools that's out there. They do, again, everything that I just talked about, but they offer a lot of things that would also be good for the sales team. So a big thing that they do focus on is data enrichment. Like they essentially have data enrichment that's built directly into form fields. So you can essentially set up your forms with Clearbit. Somebody just enters their email address and it'll give you their name, phone number, business email, company that they work for without you having to ask for it. So you see a higher form completion rate and you get all of the data that you're looking for. And they have a bunch of other sales related tools too that are really cool. So if you're looking for like an all-in-one solution that's going to help both sales and marketing, that's definitely something to look for. But the big thing with both of those, year-long contracts, they do not offer flexibility to jump between individual brands. So it is very focused on, you know, this is the tool that you're going to use as a company. So you really got to make sure it's a right fit before you move forward.
The other thing that you kind of just mentioned there is when we talk about data enrichment on forms, there's a very distinct difference here of these third-party tools pulling in data from multiple data sources versus using, you know, an out-of-the-box LinkedIn form enrichment process that you can have from LinkedIn itself, where, you know, somebody can basically fill out a form using LinkedIn data and it's auto-populating it based off of their profile and the data that they provide. And the reason I want to bring up that distinction is how many people think about updating their LinkedIn profile, either as it relates to their business email or other kind of contact information, how outdated that can quickly become if you're relying on that as an input versus a third-party tool like these that James is talking about, constantly refreshing and updating their sources of information to keep current as much as possible. So, James, that sets a good landscape here then as far as we look forward to 23, but ultimately for brands looking even beyond that, you know, what channels, we kind of name drop some early on in this podcast, but what channels does a tool such as, let's say, Versium or metadata kind of open up for a brand?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much anywhere where you can use first-party customer lists. So again, like that's pretty much every channel that exists at this point. Connected TV. I think the biggest use case right now is Facebook and Instagram. Again, it's just been one of those things where everybody's on Facebook and Instagram, but we can't reach the right people. TikTok is going to be huge. YouTube is a super interesting one. And we'll kind of, after this, get into examples of kind of unique ways that you can do this, because as you move into these channels, the great thing about LinkedIn is that everybody's in a business sense of mind. That's what they're going there for. As you move into other channels, you have to adapt your creative to those channels. So we'll give hopefully some cool campaign ideas. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much any social channel, any programmatic channel. Audio is another one that's open. Actually, I think a really cool one that, again, we'll get into. So yeah, pretty much anywhere.
A concern that might come up then is, well, what's my limited reach if I only have a list of, let's say, 20,000 individuals that are within my ICP, my target persona, and these platforms provide? The point that you brought up before of lookalikes is a great kind of example here of, you know, what is the quality of a lookalike audience if you're basing it off of third-party data targeting that ultimately leads to less qualified traffic visiting the site. Well, if your lookalike is based off of traffic, you actually have a less qualified lookalike audience than if you're creating a first party based lookalike, right?
Limited reach is good. It's like a good thing. And I think that that's something that we don't think about in B2B that much. Like, I would rather have a higher frequency on the right people than try to reach more people that there's no product market fit for. Like, I think that's the great thing about B2B marketing, is that the audience is like, we know who they are and why they would buy in most circumstances, versus a D2C brand where it's like, I don't know who's going to like Adidas shoes versus Nike shoes. Like, I'm sure they have customer profiles built out, but it's much bigger. It's much bigger and it's much more difficult to optimize versus, now we can focus on, hey, we have our 7,500 SaaS CMOs out there, but I can reach them on every place where they consume content, rather than hope that they're on LinkedIn, hope that they perform a Google search. And that's where it becomes a game changer.
It also leads to your point, audience segmentation that opens up the door for more detailed, personalized messaging based off of a buying committee, or just where certain features and UVPs of your product stand out amongst others. CTV is a great example there of, you have to balance the expense of creating different shots and cuts and things like that against segmentation, but a first party audience list upload provides is moving away from third-party broad targeting that is at its core programmatic and kind of wasteful, unless you're a D2C, B2C brand that has a huge TAM. And it also opens up the door for this audience segmented mindset that allows for impactful creative that makes an impact on somebody, whether they're working or not, right? It's an offline, online kind of experience in that case, right?
Yeah, you can tailor your creative to whatever content that they're engaging with.
And it's across all the devices, whether it's sitting in front of a TV, whether it's streaming something on your phone or tablet or on your laptop and desktop. Again, it's off hours, on hours kind of aspect of marketing in that sense. In fact, I just remembered that I got served up an ad this past weekend for a company that I was actually looking at for HR. And I know for a fact that the only reason I saw that is because of them having my contact information. There's no other reason that they should have served up some ad that was tailored to me as an agency exec.
It's funny. That's where I think that connected TV has the biggest impact overall, right? Because it's a big screen experience and you're served the content, honestly, when you least expect it. Like, I think that we're all kind of familiar with the digital channels and we'll believe anything that happens, but I don't know, when you're looking at like a sales enablement tool that you've been looking at because you visited their website and then you see them on TV, like, that makes a much stronger impact than, I don't know, a banner. I use that as the terrible example, but the same thing. Like, it's way more impactful. Think about how you stand out from the clutter in a TV ad versus LinkedIn, where everybody's trying to do the same thing. That's probably the best example. All of these channels do not have that high of an adoption for B2B marketing, B2B advertising. Like, there's not that many B2B advertisers on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, but those markets are there because they are people like everybody. They are consumers of other products. Like, they do, that's where you're going to stand out.
You talk about where people hang out. I talk about where they commute and consume. We're saying the same thing in many cases too. And audio is a great pivot point off of that is, people are listening to Pandora, Spotify at differing times of their day, whether they're working out, whether they're driving into work, whether they're just getting their day started listening to a podcast. And think about it, what is the greater opportunity here for a B2B brand? Is it sponsoring a podcast where you have a reach, but you don't necessarily control who that reach is? Or is it creating an audience list, uploading it, and targeting it to whatever they listen to, right? I think that just plays off of that CTV example of audience first, people first kind of strategy, right?
Yeah, for sure. Think of another great example for audio, and this was a pitch that we put together for essentially a logistics company, but they were targeting truck drivers. Remember that? What do you think that they're doing as they drive for 8 hours a day? watching movies. And I mean, actually, I have seen some iPhone mounts in trucks as I did a cross country trip recently, and I noticed that quite often. But yeah, everybody's listening to music, right? And you want to get in front of the right people and also have them in a mindset where their mind is just wandering for hours on end. Like, that's a great way to reach people.
Well, it gets you past the paid social walled gardens. We talked about it before. We gave the example of dental hygienists and dentists having LinkedIn profiles but not being active. The same thing can be said about having a Facebook profile but not being active. You think outside the box. You think creatively about how people are communing and consuming information, both in the big screen experience like you're talking about or the small screen experience. These tools enable you to tap into those untapped channels at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you can focus on engagement metrics a lot more too, because I feel like every ad platform is going to allow you to. I'll use like dentists and hygienists. I bet we could still spend a good amount of money on LinkedIn, even though those people aren't active, because LinkedIn's going to let us spend the money. This is where I think the industry gets a little weird and corrupt. Like, how can you spend that much money if only 1,000 of them are active? LinkedIn will find a way. But, if you're running the same or kind of have a Facebook campaign, I'm not going to say the same creative because it shouldn't be that way, but you have a Facebook campaign running at the same time and you're seeing far higher social engagement rates, it shows you that your audience is there. And the same can be said for Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and you can focus, again, a lot more on where they're engaging rather than where you have the ability to target them.
You say LinkedIn will find a way. Just kind of brought back memories of me as a child and my son watching Jurassic Park 50 million times, hearing life will find a way. Media will find a way, right?
They will. Google will definitely find a way. I can promise you that much.
Well, on that point, let's segue that into, you brought up YouTube as another untapped opportunity that these targeting tools provide. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, think about YouTube. YouTube is a great channel because it's the second largest search engine. People go to YouTube for everything. How-to content, entertaining content. There's a million reasons why people go to YouTube. And historically, the targeting on YouTube has been similar to display. You have topics, interests, very vague stuff, but they do offer first-party data targeting capabilities. So you can upload that list and target them versus saying, hey, I want to target people who, I don't know, watched this how-to video that's related to my product. We had a client for a while that was targeting graphic designers, and we did this with Adobe content because there's a million Adobe how-to videos on there. And typically somebody who's a graphic designer, an early on graphic designer, is watching those how-to videos. So, but at the same time, we don't know how many people are watching those videos are bots, spam, somebody who just let their computer run for hours on end and went down a rabbit hole, versus, again, being able to target people who we know are in our ICP, et cetera. So, I mean, some creative things that you can do there is, putting out some more, because YouTube, the great thing about YouTube ads is it doesn't have to be like, there's discovery ads and there's pre-roll ads. So you can have like long form video content that is engaging, how-to content that's related to whatever your product is. So you can be a lot more thorough and educational rather than, all the other ad platforms where you got 30 seconds to make your point. Like you can push for other metrics. Like, a big part of a YouTube strategy is having some sort of like bring me back type content, there's an episodic nature to YouTube. So get them in the introductory episode and hopefully they'll subscribe organically. And then you have somebody who's a follower from that point. So your strategy doesn't have to be solely focused on sales. It can be more focused on building an audience. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do with YouTube because the content is less limiting than it is on other channels.
Correct. And I don't think we need to get into the paid social side of this. We talk about it enough, either on this episode and other ones from Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok, Pinterest, Twitter, whoever's running ads on Twitter at this point. Any platform that allows a list upload is now an opportunity for a brand.
Yep.
So I want to also bring it back to something here where we talk a lot about generating demand and how that creation of demand ultimately leads to more searches around what you do, what you offer, and that demand being captured. What is difficult about that is understanding, okay, well, how am I influencing certain leads or accounts or contacts to take action? The opportunity that comes up with these targeting tools is, instead of third-party data targeting and kind of blasting out to a narrow audience, but still masses that you don't necessarily control about who's seeing it, who isn't, is you don't know ultimately what's actually driving somebody to have that demand created on their behalf and driving them to take that action. With these targeting tools and the move towards, let's say, contact list uploads as a targeting method, you can actually now think about, what does a holdout test look like? A holdout test in the context of, if I have a list of 20 to 30,000 individuals that are part of my ICP and my target persona, if I take 75% of those and I actively expose them to ads or any other media, versus the 25% that I do not expose or I hold out from my testing, what is the impact of my media dollars and therefore on my demand generation efforts as far as moving them through the process of becoming customers? You can get great insights into what is the true impact and where, in the sense of where do they communicate and consume, where is that actually driving that demand forward for those individuals and for you as a brand. A holdout test is something that many brands don't think about, especially in the context of B2B, because it's more of a B2C, D2C kind of thought process. But this shift in targeting allows for some creativity there. And James, I know you've talked about holdout tests a lot in the D2C realm of things, but do you want to chime in on that at all?
I think the big thing there is that you have access to the people on the list, right? So you know who they are, and you can see a visual representation of whether or not they close. I will say holdout tests in B2B are hard because of the long sales cycles. You know, you have to be in a position where you're like, okay, well, we did this holdout test for, I'll give it a probably better example just to give it a direct comparison of D2C. Like, you can do a holdout test on an e-commerce site, right? And say, hey, of the people that we exposed, we saw this much lift versus the people who we didn't expose. But you can do that over a much shorter period of time, where on the B2B side, you have 3, 6, 9, 12 month sales cycles. And I probably wouldn't recommend doing a holdout test if you had a sales cycle that was like longer than 6 months. I just think that it's just, I don't know, it would be near impossible. But if you are a B2B product that has a shorter sales cycle, use like Canva is probably a great example. Smaller, like you can easily run those tests, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And when we talk about efficiency and 23 being the year of efficiency, that's just a great example of thinking outside the box, thinking beyond just, you know, the nuts and bolts of a targeting tool and the channels that it might open up for you. And really, how do you look at driving efficiencies beyond pulling the levers, investing in tools such as, you know, the targeting tools we talked about today, or measurement tech, which we're hopefully going to be talking about in either the next episode or the episode after, and just being creative in how you approach marketing on your brand, and creative in how you really go to market and deliver that demand, generate it, and create opportunities both in leads, but also pipeline revenue for your brand. James, any closing thoughts on today's topic?
I think this is a huge opportunity for everybody. You have the ability to be more creative with your media. You can do things that are more fun, more entertaining, test out different ad types and different channels. I think there's a lot of opportunity to reach your audience in a way that they're not used to. And I think that's going to be a game changer for a lot of people.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. So with that being said, we conclude another episode of Digital Banter. Of course, like, subscribe, connect with James and I on LinkedIn or any other social. And until next time, we'll catch you later.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday.